Bum, 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 bum.
And we are officially live. So I would like to welcome everyone to another Living Maths interview with what we call STEM superheroes and STEM role models. And I must just tell you that I was watching something on the internet, a YouTube video, and you know how you get caught in this rabbit hole where it leads you all the way down and you start watching this video and that video. And then I came across a video of something that said, scientists have cracked this mystery that has been around for years. And I had to know what this mystery was. And I had to know how they managed to crack it. And I started following the details. And obviously, we're going to discuss some of that today. But I was absolutely blown away at the detective attitude, the science, the scientific approach, the problem solving, the creativity, and obviously the theories that were abound. People came up with incredible ideas on how these rocks are moving. So before we even get there, I want to introduce our very special guest. We have Dr. Richard Norris all the way out in the West Coast. And as far as I understand, and I hope I'm going to get this one right, you are currently working at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. I'm an oceanographer. Why would an oceanographer ever want to go out and study the desert? This
is the part that amazes me. I mean, I noticed that you've obviously done oceanography, but there's a lot of other stuff that goes on. I believe a little bit of paleontology as well.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, I'm a fossil.
Little bit of ocean ecosystems, evolution of marine plankton, extinction and speciation in the oceans. So clearly you are actually an ocean person,
yes,
but
yes.
Yet the way I came to know you was through rocks. So there's definitely an interesting story there, and we're going to definitely chat about that. But before we get started, I want to know, where did your passion for science first start? I mean, did it just happen that you always wanted to be a scientist, or did you kind of like have role models that pushed you in the right direction? What was your origin story?
Well, my basic story was that my parents took us on lots and lots of field trips. We went camping all over the American West when I was a little kid, and I got to just be out in nature. It was great fun, to find all sorts of new things. And of course, I was playing with my little model cars, in the dirt and stuff like that, like everybody does. But you're also seeing, that the majesty of the outdoors. And so for me, that was really transformative.
So your parents played a large role in terms of kind of getting you excited about the outdoors.
Yes, exactly.
But they didn't make you go and study that, did they?
No, it wasn't a requirement. But my mother, for example, she used to bring snakes and lizards and chickens and things like that from our house, into like the kindergarten and into first grade and so forth. So she was always the animal lady who brought all these things to all the other kids in my classrooms. And so that was really great fun. I grew up, knowing a lot about, well, at least having a familiarity with snakes and lizards and kangaroo rats. And we actually had a bobcat for a while, which is a small, wild cat. And we had an owl in my house when I was growing up. And the owl used to perch up on top of the bookcase. And then it would go out at night and go catch, mice and so forth at night, and then come back during the day and sit up on the bookcase again.
But now, was it a place to rehabilitate animals, or was it just that's where the animals came to congregate?
That's where my parents set up this, this kind of menagerie. We also had an octopus, of all things. It was about that big, a little tiny octopus that lived in a big saltwater aquarium. And we used to feed it hermit crabs. So we'd go down, we lived close to the ocean. We'd go down to the tide pools and collect hermit crabs for this little octopus. And that was fascinating because octopi are such interesting creatures. You know, it would build a little den for itself, and they can change colors, you know, very quickly as a function of how they're feeling. If they're feeling mad, they turn bright red, for example. And so we got to know all that kind of stuff about nature by virtue of just being exposed to it all the time. We had the family kind of informal zoo for the neighborhood.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah,
do you have siblings? Obviously, were you an only child, or were there a group of you that were exposed to all these animals?
Yeah, so I'm the youngest of four. So I have three older sisters. I grew up in kind of a female household, and I was the little boy kind of doted on by my sisters. I have to confess, I probably was pretty spoiled by them. But yeah, anyway, you know, so there was a whole bunch of us, and we all benefited from our parents' love of animals and nature. And as I say, all these camping trips that we went on as a family.
I think that is so cool to have like a little informal zoo, a menagerie of animals like Dr. Doolittle. That's awesome. And then, of course, the passion obviously led to going to study a little bit further. You got a science degree, then you got your master's, then you went off to Harvard and studied a little bit more. Why oceanography? Why the ocean and the marine sciences?
Well, that's a good question. How did I stumble into that? I guess, you know, so my father was a biologist, and when I was growing up, I thought, well, maybe I'd like to do something a little different than him. But I was, you know, because I think it's like families, when you grow up in a family of plumbers, you know everything about plumbing, right?
Correct.
And so it's very easy to become a plumber. And in my case, I grew up in a family of scientists. So it was very easy. It was natural for me to know a lot about science and to be sort of familiar with how you do it, you know, as a kind of the culture of it all. And so in any case, so I thought I would be a scientist. I actually thought for a while I might be a historian. I was also interested in history. And I've also been interested for a long time in how people make decisions about things, you know, like politics or law. I'm actually happy I didn't go in that direction. I'm a terrible lawyer. But in any case, you know, so some of these things are, you kind of, you grow up in the middle of it, it becomes a natural sort of thing for you. And so that was true for me in science. And so I thought, well, I'll do something different than what my dad did. And that led me into geology, which was something that one of my sisters, of all things, I was following my sister into the field. She became a geologist also. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting topic. So I'll pursue that. But then I've had this crossover. I'm a paleontologist because, of course, I've always admired my father's, you know, love of biology. And paleontology, you can do both. You know, you're both a rock person working on fossils of things that are long dead. And then you're also, of course, a biologist, because you have to understand, you know, these fossils were once living creatures. And so what was that like? So that was kind of how I got into the geology game.
And then, of course, from there, you got into marine science. How did that go? So you went from rocks, biology, to the biology of fish and other species. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, you know, I got into the oceanography game because when I finished I worked on marine fossils when I was in college. And then when I went off to do what's called a postdoctoral degree, after I finished my Ph.D., then I went to a place called Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which is on the east coast of the U.S. In Massachusetts. And it's right there on the ocean. And it was fascinating because there were physicists, there were chemists, there were geologists like me, you know, there were people who were studying the physical dynamics of the ocean, biologists, of course, you know, and so you had this whole mix of people all looking at different components of the oceans. And I just found that really exciting. It was neat to be able to walk into somebody's office who is a physicist, you know, who ordinarily would have no connection to, you know, but we could talk about the ocean. And so that was fascinating to to be able to interact with people, intellectually that you might not otherwise meet, in your entire career if you were an ordinary scientist or at a place that had less of this kind of interdisciplinary flavor. So that got me into scientific ocean drilling of all things. So we're drilling holes in the sea floor. I actually have one of the drill bits right here. So this is one of the tools that we use to punch holes into the bottom of the ocean floor.
How deep do you go?
Oh, well, we could drill more than a kilometer with tools like this.
What do you find? I mean, are you looking for oil? Are you looking for some sort of paleontological database of things that are below the ocean?
We're looking for time. We're looking for it's like you can think of the bottom, the mud that has been accumulating on the bottom of the ocean is like a tape recorder, or we don't have tape recorders anymore, but it's like time travel. It's like having your own time machine, because you can look back in Earth history at what our planet used to be like. So our planet has gone through all kinds of amazing changes over time. We've had massive volcanic eruptions in Earth's history that were far, far bigger than anything we've ever seen today. We've had big asteroids or comets or something plowing into the Earth, making big holes in the ground, ending the demise of the dinosaurs, for example. And we've had times when the world has been much warmer than it is today, as potential analogs for what might happen in the future with global change.
And you could pick that up from the samples that you're getting from under the ocean.
Yeah, because the oceans record basically everything that's happening on the surface of Earth. We get dust and pollen and soot from fires and mud and so forth washed off of the land surface, and it winds up in the ocean. And so there you have a record of what kinds of plants were around in the far past. What kinds of when there were major fires, or when there were times when the climate was much more arid than it is today, and you get a lot of dust. So, for example, I was on an expedition that landed in Cape Town back in 2016, and we were drilling holes in the ocean floor from Mozambique all the way around to just south of Cape Town. And it's cool because those records, there were about 7 million years of Earth history in those cores, and they contain, you can see all the dust that is being blown off of, say, the Karoo Desert or off of Eastern Africa into the ocean. And so we can tell, when were times of relative drought, when were times when it was wet, and how does that relate to human evolution in the case of South Africa? It's one of our big objectives was, we know that people evolved in Southern Africa. It's the cradle of humanity, according to folks up around Johannesburg. And it's so cool. What a fantastic record, that Southern Africa has of the whole sort of the environmental conditions under which we all appeared on planet Earth. So yeah, anyway.
You had me at hello. I mean, I could speak for hours just about the soil samples themselves and how you would obviously look at the layers and how would you know about the forest fires and these things just from what you're picking out from the sand. But what really got me going was this idea that there is a place called Death Valley, but I'm assuming that this probably happens in other places around the world.
Yeah, probably. Actually, well, I have some pictures if you'd like to see them. I could.
If you want to share, sure.
I could share my screen and show you some of the slides. Let's see. This is a picture here. Maybe I guess let's see how we look at. I have trouble seeing exactly what you're.
Well, I can see. I can see your page, and if you're zooming in, we can see the one on the right quite clearly.
Okay, well, anyway, this picture, you can see that one, right? Yeah. So, and you can see my cursor. So these are trails that were carved by these rocks.
How heavy are these rocks?
The rocks are maybe 20 kilos or something like that.
So that's a substantial rock. I mean, it's not something that just moves around, when the wind blows.
No, the biggest ones out there are about 60 kilos. So they're honking big rocks, and they weigh a lot. I couldn't pick up the biggest ones by any means. And this rock, you can see where my cursor is, it had made a trail like this hairpin turn. It's like a clothespin or something like that. So the rock would come in this direction, and then it took a sharp bend around, and it wound up here. And then there's another trail that comes like this, you can see, and it kind of did a little pirouette, and then off it goes, and we can't even see the rock anymore.
How long would it take for a rock to do that?
Oh, well, that was the question. Like, did this happen instantaneously? Are these things speeding along, and then screeching around a corner, with wheels squealing and so forth, to do this? That was one of our big questions. Now, this is a time when this dry lake, ordinarily dry lake, was wet, but this next picture is what it looks like most of the time. So here you see the surface of a dry lake. It's got mud cracks all over it because it used to have water in it. And then there's these trails with a rock at the end of the trail. And here's another one, the trail. And actually this one has the rock is right over here, I think. And so, this is the fundamental, this has been a mystery since the 19th.
Someone said over 100 years.
Yeah, exactly. And so the issue is how do the rocks move? And as you say, how fast do they go?
Now I'm curious. I just want to ask you this. All right. How did you know about this mystery? Because you're busy drilling in the ocean, and you're busy looking at other things. How did you know about this mystery, and why did you get a bee in your bonnet about it?
Well, so I knew about this because, actually I've known about it for quite a lot longer than this, but when I was a undergraduate student in college, my first college class was a geology class, and there was a little sidebar in the textbook about this phenomenon, and some of the different theories that scientists had come up with to explain what was going on. And so, at that point, it was like, wow, that's kind of interesting, but then my cousin came to me, and his father was a geologist also, and who I knew, of course, growing up. And his father had taken field trips regularly out to this place to show his students, this weird phenomenon. And so my cousin came to me and he says, I'm an engineer. I think we could probably solve this problem. And so it was from then on, that was off to the races. We had, we assembled.
When was this? When did you get this decision that you were going to now solve this problem?
That was 2010, I think it was, or 2011, something like that.
So about 11 or 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Up until then, scientists had not found a reasonable explanation as to why these rocks were moving. And you and your cousin decided, you know what? We are going to do something different. We're going to find a solution that no one else could.
Yeah, exactly. And that was, was just a fun thing we recognized. So here's a picture of this dry lake. You can see there's the dry lake. This is Death Valley. So it's really quite an arid place, and suitable for the name, right? The rocks I was showing you before, they come from right down in here. And so the rocks are moving across the surface of this dry lake. And the question, of course, is obviously, how does that happen? It's very remote. So to get in here, you drive over this pass, and it's very bouncy, bumpy, bouldery roads and so forth to go over. So you can't get in there very easily. It's a long, bumpy drive. And so as a consequence, people don't visit it that much. And I think that was part of the mystery was, clearly the rocks move, but we'd never seen it happen. And part of the reason for that is that it's a hard place to get to. So I can't remember what my others. Oh, this is a very classic experiment.
Now, I remember seeing this in the video clip. Can you explain it to us? And without revealing the answers to why these rocks are moving, because I want to ask the audience over here if they have any theories as to how these rocks are moving through the desert or this lake on their own.
Yeah, good. So this is a classic experiment. It was done back in the 1970s by a professor from Caltech, which is a pretty highfalutin, a pretty fancy institution here in Southern
California. He's
California.
an engineer too.
No, he was a geologist.
Actually. Oh, he was a geologist. Okay.
Sharp. And what he did was that this is back in the day when there was rocks sitting out on this dry lake. You've seen those, here's the mud cracks, for example. Mm-hmm. And they took pieces of rebar and they, metal stakes, and they drove those stakes in around two rocks, because this rock used to be sitting right about there. And the question was, there's different theories about why the rocks might move. One of them was that ice might be moving the rocks, that ice is sliding along, the rocks are being pushed around by ice. And so the theory was, if you put the stakes in, that would keep the ice from moving, the rocks would not move, right? And the problem was that they came back the next year and they saw this, because that clearly one rock didn't go anywhere and the other one did. And so that strongly seemed to suggest that ice was not the driving mechanism behind all this, because after all, both rocks should have moved, or the stake should have been torn out or something like that. So the alternative, so there's two different notions. I'll give you the science behind it. Mm-hmm. One is that this is a picture also of the racetrack. There's a person for scale here. This is a paper by John Reed. And you can see all the trails in here, okay? And what these guys did is that they mapped these trails, and then they could overlay the trails on top of each other to see how similar they were. And so this is a series of 7 different trails laid on top of each other to see the similarities. And you notice that they follow almost exactly.
They do.
And then look at this one. Here are, a whole bunch more trails, and they are like perfect matches for each other. So how does that happen? If we go back to that first picture of mine, you have 2 rocks that apparently followed the same basic trajectory.
Yes, and it's like that little L-shaped thing.
I relate them to, back in Napoleonic period, you get the ships of the line of battle with their with their cannons and their sails and so forth. Boy, I should have got some water.
If you need to get water, that's cool, because I'm quite happy to. I want to ask the audience if they have a theory. So you want to get some water, and I'll ask the audience if they have a theory on how they think these rocks are moving.
Yeah. So before you go to that,
okay.
The big mystery is, how do you get these fairly heavy rocks to follow the same paths? Okay, these 2 rocks basically came this direction and then took a pirouette. But then the same thing clearly happened back here. You have a trail like that, and then also a rock going off. And this rock traveled farther than these 2 rocks. So how does that work? I think
I'm thinking in my head, when the idea of these rocks are moving first came up, you found these trails and you thought, okay, that's odd, a rock trail, something must have moved it. So then you start coming up with theories. Then you start analyzing the paths, and you notice that there are similarities in the paths, and in particular, those hairpin bends, those L shapes. That's a very unusual path for the rock to take. If it was going to move straight, is far more logical to understand, but an L shape doesn't make sense. Yeah. And maybe it's got to do with the incline. Maybe it's got to do with the wind. I don't know. I'm curious to know what the audience thinks. So we're going to we're going to pick on some people over here. Let's go like this. Champion Middle School, do you have anyone who has a theory? Colleen, anyone who's got a theory on how these rocks are moving? I have to unmute you. Sorry. There we go. You can try it again. Click on it now to unmute. There you unmute. Yeah, we can hear you.
We're baffled by the whole thing. However, our guesstimation a lucky guess would be that it has something to do with the polar magnetic pools, as well as the maybe magnetic lines within the Earth that the rocks are following, and perhaps there's some level of
correspondence with the moon, maybe?
With the moon, yes.
Now that is interesting.
I did have a question though. Are these lines being created during a rainy season, dry season? Is there a particular time when the movement is taking place versus when it's not?
Yeah, excellent question.
Which now, but don't give the answer just yet, because
I'm not going to say anything. Yeah.
That is obviously, as a scientist, you've got to start asking those kinds of questions to establish exactly what is going on here. But you see, we do have scientists at Champion Middle School. They're obviously paying attention to those aspects. I'm curious, Ivy, you and your friend, do you want to throw out a theory of what you think is happening? What makes those rocks move? If you don't want to, you don't have to. And Govinda out in Nepal, would you like to hazard a guess as to why these things? All right, well, there's Ivy. Do you guys want to take a guess? What is making those rocks move? Maybe very large ants.
Perhaps.
I actually kind of always thought that it was aliens.
Aliens? So now we've got magnetic poles, we've got aliens. I'm liking this. Very interesting. And your friend, what does your friend think?
Aliens as well.
Aliens as well. Oh, well, there we go. I mean, it's an obvious answer. Not a bad answer. Let's go. Is that Robin over there? Let's find out. Robin, do you want to give us a guess what you think is happening with these rocks? Are you able to? Oh, there you unmuted.
No, I don't know.
No idea. Well, that's okay. No, don't feel bad. There were scientists who had no idea for like almost 100 years. So you are in good company. Oh, Govinda, you said, I was thinking of the inclined area where the bends were made. So now we're throwing out some key aspects here. We've got, and Luke, do you want to have a turn? Do you want to throw out an idea? Let's find out if Luke wants to throw out an idea. Yes, no, maybe. Okay, maybe too shy. So we've got magnetic poles. We've got things involving, and I mean, some of these rocks could be with a metal, an iron core, a magnetic core. Maybe they're sliding around because of Earth's magnetic pull. We've got inclines. We've got aliens. We've got questions about the weather and rainy season. How are we doing with our guesses so far?
These are great guesses so far.
Did you come up with any of these at all?
Did I come up with them?
I mean, did you think any of these might have been likely answers at the early stages?
We very much agreed that weather probably had something to do with it, because the two basic notions, one is that it's strong winds. So there you need like big windstorms or something that might move rocks. And then the other was that, that it was, because of like really you have to have wet conditions too for the rocks to slide. So I do need to go.
You go get your water. Don't worry. So while you are getting your water, I must just tell you that this has been baffling scientists for a long time. And every time I look at the images, I can't get my head around how a 20 or 30 kilogram rock, which is about 40 pounds, is moving, and not just in a straight line, it's moving and then at an angle. And I'm looking at this, and this is a lake bed that is flat. So I don't even see the incline. So clearly the incline wasn't there. So that was confusing to me. So what do you have to say about that? Well, you're on mute at the moment. There we go.
I was going to say, I could show you some more evidence without giving the answer away.
Show us more evidence.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again.
Okay.
This is a picture of an experiment that we did. to look at this issue of weather, okay, what the weather conditions might be like. And so here we are, we're out on a different dry lake. This is my cousin's car. And we have, and actually his mom is sitting right here. This is like a family affair. We did all this kind of stuff as a family. And what we did is we made our own little ponds. Okay, so we took a bit of lawn edging and we dug it in around a section of the dry lake. And then we had a water buffalo, that's what we call these things, these big tanks, you know, and we bought water from the local water district and we poured it on the playa and made this nice little pond. And then we had our set of test rocks and we pulled the test rocks across the surface of that muddy pond in order to see whether you needed to have standing water on the playa in order to make the rocks move. And this is the result of that experiment. So here you see some of our rock trails. See that? You know, these are not good rock trails. The rocks stuck. You know, if you've ever walked across a muddy field, you know, with your boots very quickly get covered with mud, right? You get clod hoppers is what we call them. And clod hoppers are when the mud is sticking to your boots and it makes a big clump and it becomes very hard to walk. The same thing happens with rocks. So if it's just a wet surface of the dry lake, then the rocks stick and then they kind of bounce along as you're pulling on them. But if the rocks are in a flooded area, if there's actually standing water on the surface, they make relatively nice smooth trails like these right here.
And that's like a clay. I mean, that surface, when it gets wet, it becomes like a clay.
Oh yes, it becomes a really sticky, slippery clay, okay? But the key finding is that you have to have standing water to make rock trails. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Otherwise, they just stick.
This was obviously key in your first step of reaching the solution, that there must be water involved.
Must be water, and not just any old water. There needs to be at least a shallow pond. The dry lake needs to have at least a couple of centimeters of water on the surface of it to make good rock trails.
Okay.
And it turns out that the frictional forces that are involved in making a rock trail in a couple of centimeters of water, they're very low. The rocks slide very easily. And we also know that because we saw the tracks of kit foxes. They're very cute, little, almost like the size of a cat. And they live out there naturally on the dry lake. And we found one place where the kit fox had been walking across the lake and then it walked through the water and it fell over. It slipped and fell on its side. And you see the trails are indicating that the poor kit fox was trying to get up, you know, off the really, really slick surface. Yeah, anyway, so you need to have a pond. You can go back to your theorizing at this point, but got to have standing water.
Okay, so now we know that if there's moisture and a substantial amount, a significant amount of moisture, that means we have something that can help the rock move along the surface. And as scientists, of course, you started off by creating an experiment, and you did that to rule out certain things and to perhaps even explore alternative routes. So water doesn't make a rock move. You need something else to go with it. So what was your next step?
Okay, so here is the setup to our experiment. I'll share my screen again. And so let's see, I guess it's this one.
And I'm loving the fact that you probably sat there and after the first experiment, spent hours and hours talking around a campfire saying, you know, we actually put the rocks there. And then the one would say, well, you know, they didn't really move unless we pulled them. So something must have been moving them.
Yeah, something must have been moving them. So we this is a great excuse to go camping in the desert. We got lots of our friends out there to help us. We also did things, we made our own rocks, as it turns out. Here's the picture of it. So we quarried rocks that are similar to the ones that are out on the actual racetrack. And we drilled holes in them. You see the holes in here? And we inserted these little metal cups into those holes. And those cups held a little GPS unit, a small device to record the location of the rock. And here's a picture of me lugging one of these rocks out.
And those look heavy.
And they're heavy, and you have to carry them about a kilometer, almost 2 kilometers to the field area. So it's like actually a lot of work. We also set up a weather station because we knew that the weather had something to do with this, and we'd need to know, when what the weather was like when the rocks actually had moved. The GPSs, by the way, also the global positioning satellite tools, they would tell us when the rocks moved as well as where they were going.
But were you there at the time, or you were away, but remotely you were getting a signal, by the way, rocks have started moving, and then you go and check the weather, and then you can correlate the data?
Yeah, exactly. So the problem is, I told you about that terrible road going into the racetrack.
Mm-hmm.
It could easily be that we wouldn't be there when the rocks were moving. So we wanted to be able to record it in case it happened when we were not around. And so that's why we had this weather station. And by the way, we also made ourselves fancy shirts too. You probably didn't see that so well, but we made little logos and stuff like that. And there we are, all wearing our fancy shirts. And so here's the experiment. So this is a map of the racetrack playa. This is the area where the natural stones occur. And this is where we put our rocks, okay? And here's our weather station right there. So that's our experimental setup.
Your location of your rocks, why particularly there and not where the natural stones were?
Well, that was because this is the park. This is Death Valley National Park, and they didn't want us to have our rocks in
I see. Okay.
And that was because they were looking out for the public. They thought the public might not, might feel that it was sort of ruined as an experience if they saw that there was experimental stuff going on.
So science experiments could have been affected. The results could have been affected because of location of those rocks.
Potentially, yeah. So here is what we were doing. We did this for 2 years.
2 years.
2 years. So here's my cousin. He's the engineer. This is my let's see, she must be a second cousin to me. His niece, who lives usually in Australia, but she came to visit and into California. And they're sitting next to one of our test rocks here. And there you see is the little hole with the GPS in it. And the system looks like this. So here's the hole. Here is a little card with a chip on it that is the GPS chip, and it's attached to a battery. And the problem is we had to change the batteries periodically to keep the whole thing running.
I can imagine.
We were doing this for 2 years without anything happening. So it's a long time. Sometimes science isn't that fast.
and solar powered GPS to charge the batteries?
Well, that would be nice, except the units are so small that it wouldn't work, as it turns out. So we weren't able to do that. So anyway, that was our experimental setup. We knew that if the rocks moved, the GPSs would record where they went and how fast they went and all that kind of stuff. And then our weather station would tell us what the weather conditions were like. So anyway, any comments about that? I'm going to stop for a moment.
Already some things are coming to my mind, but do you have any questions? Let's go back to Champion Middle School. So now you're getting a sense that perhaps water was involved. They've got the GPSs going. Any other theories you want to add to that?
That still doesn't take into account what's making the energy, the kinetic, the movement, and maybe I don't know if it's maybe having to deal with the Earth's rotation in terms of gravitational pull and giving it some desire to move. I don't know what that part of it is. Are the rocks do the rocks have a magnetic charge or some to some degree where it would be affected by either the poles or something within the Earth?
So you're not convinced that there's wind involved? Or even the moon. You think it's a magnetic pull? You don't think that wind is making those things move?
I think wind, it would take an incredibly large amount of force to do that using just wind. I mean, it's not like there's a sail that it's the wind is, I mean, it's harnessing the wind and pulling it. So just instinctively, I think because the rocks seem to be curved, they're circular, that the wind would kind of aerodynamically go over the rock and not necessarily be pushed by the,
I'm loving the science. This is exciting because this is what it's all about.
I love that too. And you are absolutely right. That wind is not anywhere near what we need to make this work. Although wind is involved, as it turns out. It's just not directly wind blowing on the rocks themselves. But your intuition is correct. There was a guy who landed a small plane on the playa, and he did experiments where he tried to get the prop wash of the plane to move rocks, and nothing happened, basically. The rocks rolled. They didn't actually slide. They tumbled, and of course not very big rocks. So wind is just not effective. Now, as it turns out, I'll respond to the magnetic theory. Because other people have proposed that same idea. I mean, very good. You come up with something that has been bumped around in the literature for a while. The big problem with that, turns out it's not true, because the rocks are not magnetic. They're made out of a limestone, and limestone doesn't have any of the magnetic particles in it that would ordinarily make a rock magnetic. So,
and of course, if you were putting your quarry rocks there and they were moving and they were definitely not magnetic, then throw that theory out the window.
yeah. So, but that's exactly how we do this, right? Is that you come up with these hypotheses and then you kill one after another.
That is amazing.
And then you hope you're left with something.
But now, so you've set up a GPS, you've connected it to your rock, you've got a weather station, and you're sitting at home, and your cell phone goes ping, and you look, and the rock is moving, and you get excited because now you know it's moving, and now you're jumping up and down to go and look at the data. What do you find?
Do you want to hear what we discovered at this point?
Well, unless there's a step before that you took before you got there. I'm loving the suspense, though.
Well, so I could give you a little flavor about that. So here's what we observed, okay? And I'm going to show you some slides for this too. So we'll share. So this is a picture that we took, in late 2013, and this is the racetrack playa, but it has water on it. And you can see this beautiful reflective sheen. The water is only about like that deep, maybe 3 to 4 centimeters deep. It's not a deep pond. And it's gorgeous.
It's a photographer's dream. I mean, just look at if you turn your head, the symmetry is magnificent.
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost perfectly still. And then this is the conditions that we had. We went out there and we discovered that some of our rocks had actually moved when we were not there.
Okay.
And it turned out these arrows here show the time. This is the months from November to February 2014. And these are when we know the rocks moved. This one happened first. We weren't there to see it. We were there to see these two, as it turns out, and we were there to see these two. And this is the air temperature. And here we have the wind speed, the wind again. And then we have the insolation. That's how much sunlight is falling on the ground surface. And you can see that in sunlight, we had some cloudy days. Here's another set of cloudy days. There was a snowstorm at this time, actually. And you can see that the stormy times were also windy. So we got up to 4 meters a second winds, which is not actually that strong, as it turns out. And then look at this. Here's the air temperature. There was a big storm that rolled in here. It got quite cold, okay? The dotted line is freezing temperatures. So here we're regularly going below freezing at night, all right? So the surface of this big pond freezes every night. It freezes into ice that is about, maybe half a centimeter thick or something like that.
Oh, so because of the water and because of the air temperature, you get An ice rink.
We get ice rink, but the ice is not completely solid. It's it's just a floating layer of ice. The water underneath the ice is still liquid, and so the ice can move around, and that's where the wind comes in, because the ice can be blown by the wind. You have this, several kilometer square pond with an ice sheet on top of it, and that ice actually engages the wind pretty effectively over that distance. And it actually can, as it turns out, move rocks. And so this is what we first saw when my cousin and I turned up. And this is the ice-covered pond. And you can see the rocks out here that are sticking up through the pond.
But now, wait a second. The rocks are sticking up through the pond, but aren't they held by the ice? Because they're not on top of the ice.
They're not on top of the ice. The ice is around them. And so if the ice were to go anywhere, if it were to move anywhere, it would drag the rocks with them, right? Okay, so the next thing that we observed is that you can see my cursor, we walked over here, which was actually on part of this dry lake surface at that point. It didn't have water on it. And we saw this. We saw this nice little picture. So here is the pond, the edge of the pond, and the wind came up and the pond started to advance towards us. It was being blown by the wind. And so this is this sort of mucky water blowing up on the edge of the shore. And then we walked around to the shoreline over here and we saw this. Here is the ice. That's my cousin right there. And here is the ice. You can see the thin ice has been blown up on the shoreline, and it has plowed the edge of the shoreline. You can see the mud that has been shoved up on the shoreline. I don't have a picture of the thinness of the ice, but the ice looks like it is. It's about the thickness of window glass. It's not
like a maybe 2 coins thick or something.
Exactly, and it's very thin, and actually it's kind of fragile. You can break it very easily. But then we walked around to where the rocks are, and we saw this. Look at that. This is the shoreline down here. I showed you before. That's actually a little remnant of the ice on the shoreline. The water has all been blown away by the wind, and it has exposed these trails with rocks in some cases at the end of a trail, and in other cases the rocks have been blown much farther offshore. But you see all these very, very.
But that's a lot of rocks. I mean, that's quite a few.
We estimated at the time. We estimated there was 70 rocks that had been moved. I think it was more. Later on, we discovered it was more like 300 rocks had moved.
Wow.
And some of them are big. Remember the 60-kilogram rock?
I mean, that's big.
That's big. In any case, let's see, what should I say? So then the next day we came out to look at it again, and here we are. There's the shoreline down here. This is all ice covered, again, with a thin little sheet of ice on top of it. And here we are. We're early in the morning. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning, I think. The wind starts to pick up, and it starts to make the ice crack and break up. And the whole surface of the playa was going pop, 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 like that. Like because the ice was fracturing under the strength of the wind. Here is another view of it. You can see the ice-covered areas are a little shiny, and the areas where the liquid water are duller kind of colors. And we saw this. So here's a rock, and here's the ice moving past the rock, and the ice is acting like a little icebreaker. It's smashing up the rock or the ice as the ice moves past it. The rock is not sliding in this case. And then here we have liquid water. And later on, we saw this. Okay, this is one of our GPS rocks. You can see the GPS in the top of the rock, and there's its rock trail. Okay, so now we're getting close to the theory of what's going on. Here's my cousin removing the GPS. It's very cold, early morning with ice all over the place.
At that point, were you excited that when you got there and you saw that your particular rocks had moved, you figured, well, now once we get this data, we will have the solution?
Exactly. We said,
you were feeling confident at this point.
We've got it. We've got it. And I can tell you, my cousin and I were just so excited by the whole thing. It was like, oh, finally, after 2 years of changing these batteries out, driving on this cruddy road, we're finally going to solve the mystery. Mm-hmm. And so here's some of the data that we got off of those GPSs. This is the rock trail that was made by 2 different rocks. Those 2 different rocks were, I think, 700 meters apart. So they were not close together. And then this is the velocity. This is how fast the rocks were traveling. This is time down here in minutes. So 18 minutes after the start of the rock move, and the same thing over here. And then this is the velocity, how fast the rock was going. And you can see this particular rock, it's sped up to a grand total of 5 meters a minute.
5 meters a minute is fast.
Well, it turns out 5 meters a minute is actually slower than you think. It's going like this. The rock is going approximately that speed. Okay?
You've obviously never seen me run, but okay, that's wonderful.
I think of it as being like a baby crawling across the floor. It's kind of like that speed. You
must remember, we're talking about a rock here. It's got no legs, and generally rocks are not famous for winning the 100 meters. So when it's moving 5 meters a minute, it's still pretty impressive for a rock.
Yeah, and it's going, on its own volition, apparently. But in any case, this particular rock, it sped up to 6 meters a minute. After about 8 minutes, it dropped down to about 3 meters a minute. And then it stopped moving 16 minutes after it started moving. And look at this, rock number 2, 700 meters away. It follows the same trajectory. So the same velocity, the same position, the same direction, and so forth. This is clearly ice driving.
And despite the fact that the one was 16 kilograms and the other one was only 8 kilograms, I see?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, an 8 and a 16 kilogram rock.
So the mass of the rock was irrelevant. They both still moved at the same speed, same trajectory.
Exactly. And this is what that looked like from the air, by the way. So my cousin is also a pilot. He has many different talents. And here's the racetrack, and there is the pond we were talking about. So this would periodically freeze, and then that frozen surface layer of ice being moved by relatively light winds was pushing all these rocks across the surface of the playa. And this is another view of the same thing. Okay, there's the pond right here. The rocks are all down right about in there. And then this is what I call the mud flat. It's an area where the water here, when the wind is blowing from the right-hand side, it literally blows all this water over here. Mm-hmm. And of course, if there's any ice sitting on top of the liquid water, then the ice will move too. And so here's another view of rocks in motion. So here's a rock that's moved like that. This rock is moved like that. And you can see here's the ice that is cracking up around the rock. The rest of this is all ice covered in here. So the ice is it's on water, a layer of liquid water that's only a centimeter or 2 deep.
So the aerial view also gave you an important perspective in terms of the movement of the water and where the direction of the wind and that sort of thing.
Exactly. Here's another rock. This is actually a rock that was broken into 2 different pieces. They were both being pushed the same way by ice. You don't really see the ice, but the ice is all around this particular rock, pushing the rock this direction. And here is the trail forming underneath the ice, okay, in the liquid water under the ice. And another perspective of this is here you can see this is ice right here. This is open water right there, okay, and more ice out here. This ice sheet is moving this direction, and you can see the rocks that are embedded in the ice that are being pulled along with that ice sheet, or being pushed along by it, actually. And then the ice breaks up into bigger pieces, and they kind of independently go off in different directions. Here's another one. The ice sheet started off moving across the field of view like this, making these trails. There's here, another one right there, another one right here. And then the ice sheet changed direction, and it began going away from the viewer, and the rock takes a hard angle turn. Ha ha ha. Okay. You figure, so those hairpin turns are all being formed by rocks creeping along like the little proverbial baby, crawling across the floor.
But all simultaneously moving in that shape. So that obviously indicates that en masse, they were all moving at the same time. And obviously that's where the ice, what do you call it? The layer of ice was actually doing all the movement.
Yeah. Oh, actually, this might work. Okay. So this is a video of a moving rock. And so what you've got is you have liquid water here. This sort of gray interval is an ice sheet. Here is a rock. There's another rock out there and another rock right here. Okay. This is the one that's going to move. Okay, because it's embedded in ice. And the ice is moving across the field of view like this. So we'll play our little video. Hopefully this will work.
It's working.
Rock. I'm going to put my cursor where it has been. Okay. The rock starts to move.
It's moving.
Off it goes. Okay. And then I think it stops pretty quickly in here. It doesn't go that far. But you can see that after just a couple of minutes, it stops moving. That so far is our best video of the whole process.
And I mean, when you got that footage, that must have been the most satisfying footage. I mean, people would say to you, like, what's your favorite video ever? And you go, here we go, a rock moving in water. And people go, that is absolutely like so not amazing. And you're like, no, you don't understand. This is a labor of love. It's been, I don't know how many years you've invested energy and time into it, and you've actually solved the problem. And now you've got video evidence of it.
Yeah. I think it's very satisfying when, we were totally wrong, by the way. I should admit, that we had the wrong idea. We thought that wind might actually be a viable mechanism of blowing the rocks around because of that so-called corral experiment, the one with the stick. And that seemed like convincing evidence that ice was not involved. But it turns out the ice is just so thin that the ice breaks right around those stakes. And so it's not impeded by the stakes very much, and it can move a rock out of that circle of stakes because of its thin nature. And so that, I think, is, I want to show you another picture. This mechanism, it works elsewhere. This is the Great Lakes. This is in Ontario, Canada. And look at that.
I have seen video images of the lake encroaching onto the land where it's like an ice tsunami coming through.
And it's a slow moving one too.
Correct.
The ice is being blown across one of the Great Lakes in Canada, and and where does it go? Well, it piles up on the beach. But then there's still like kilometers more ice, upstream of that. So it gets to be a bigger pile and a bigger pile and a bigger pile. And eventually that pile of ice can smash right through people's lakeside houses.
Wow.
And that, of course, is where you have a lot of ice. The racetrack doesn't have nearly enough ice to do this kind of thing. The best we do is this, a sort of little pile of earth made by this ice that is blown across the racetrack. But if you have a big lake, man, it can do a lot of damage. And this is not obviously a very common phenomenon, but it happens. Well, look on YouTube. You can find the videos of this.
I've seen the video. I was absolutely flabbergasted watching the people standing there, just looking at it in complete disbelief.
Yeah. Now, I want you to realize that science is all about finding more mysteries and revealing that they are mysteries. And so it turns out the racetrack has things we don't understand still about it. And here's one of them. So this is the same place we were just talking about. And here you have a rock trail or a trail, and here's a little pile of earth, and there's no rock. And there's the same thing here, 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 here. There's another one right there. Turns out there's hundreds of them. Hundreds of what
is this another bee in your bonnet? Are you telling me there's another bee in your bonnet?
Yeah, it's like, what the heck? And actually, I can show this. This is a map of these things. They're little arrows, which you probably can't see. maybe I could make the.
No, I mean, we can see that the little dots and stuff there.
Yeah. So this will no. Oh yeah, it does work.
No, we can see a larger image.
Well, sorry, I thought I could make this be more obvious. But in any case, it doesn't really matter. So this is, all these little arrows are where these little rockless trails occur. So there's a whole band of them along in the area that was that kind of mud flat. Remember that? You can see we have the pond over here. We have this kind of mud flat area over here. It's clearly a natural phenomenon that makes a trail without any rock on it. Okay, that thing all over again. And so what is going on?
And you haven't solved that one yet, or you're still looking to solve it?
We haven't solved this one. We have a hypothesis. We don't know if the hypothesis is true. So keep watching.
No, we have a part two. I'm absolutely fascinated at this is the kind of thing that getting students involved in citizen science and real exploration and adventure, where they actually see the application of actual science being tested in a fun situation, a scenario where they actually get to see that their knowledge could contribute to a discovery that has perplexed people for years.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the fun things about this whole thing, is that there's just so much stuff to discover, and that you solve one problem, and then you realize that there's actually a lot of other interesting things out there that you'd never thought about before.
But now, if I understand correctly, you not only inspired a whole bunch of people on YouTube and around the internet to because they were fascinated to know what the story was behind the moving rocks, but we had a young student in Germany, was it, that did a science expo project.
So do you see a picture of Ronja here?
Yes.
So there's Ronja. Ronja was a teenager when she first started studying this process of the moving rocks in Germany. And her family lives down by Basel, which is southern Germany, right at the intersection of Switzerland and France and Germany. And she was towing rocks across her parents' lawn with a force meter attached to it to try to figure out what the forces were that were involved in moving a rock. And then she had this very cool experiment. So when we published our paper and said that ice was involved, she had access. Most people don't have this kind of stuff, but she had access to a wind tunnel, and in a company that was there in Basel, and so she took a cookie sheet and she put water in it and she put it in the freezer. She made her own ice sheet, and she froze a force meter into the ice sheet, and then floated it on water in the wind tunnel. And so now she knew how big the cookie sheet was, and therefore how big her ice sheet was. She knew what the wind speed was that she was using to exert force on the ice sheet. And she could measure how much force it took to move an ice sheet of various sizes. And the cool thing from that physics experiment is that she could scale that up to the kilometer-sized ice sheets that exist out on racetrack playa, okay, that make rocks like the one she's jumping off of move. And it turns out her cute little experiment, it's such a wonderful experiment, is that she could show that the force on rocks is like many, many bulldozers. It's enormous amounts of force that is exerted by the movement of a several kilometer square ice sheet. So it's no problem to make rocks move. There's plenty of force to do that.
Was that surprising to you when you found when you eventually came to the conclusion as to what was making it move? Were you surprised at the results, or were you looking to just concur with your original findings?
I was surprised at the results, I have to confess. I hadn't thought to do that. Ronja came up with a novel experiment that I had not thought to do. And I had tried to calculate what the forces were, but her experiment was much more elegant than what I did. And we, of course, had observed the process. It's not like we had any doubt about what the mechanism was, but her finding that the forces are just enormous was really, it was delightful. And the cool thing is, she's from a family kind of like mine. Her family has lots of animals. They have stick insects, for example. Her mother loves owls.
Okay, so you know where she's heading.
I know exactly where she comes from, you know, in terms of her love of exploration of things. And so we actually, my cousin and I, we hosted the family and we took them out to the racetrack when they were over in the United States for a wedding. And they visited the racetrack and we had a great time with the whole family.
That is amazing. So when is your TED Talk coming out?
Well, I probably should do something like that, but I
think you should. I'll see if I can put you in touch with you. I think, you know what? I think it's a fascinating story of pure grit, where you get this bee in your bonnet that you have to try and solve a problem. You start looking at the various tools that you have at your disposal. You look at the scientific method, you revise, you test, you exclude certain things because of certain findings, and you come up with an incredible solution. And what drives me is the fact that you inspired the love and the passion in a younger generation who now are, you know, replicating small scale experiments and doing the most incredible thing. I think that it's an incredible story. It really is an incredible story. Yeah. And now you're telling me there are more question marks.
Well, I agree with that in the sense that, first of all, I want to be honest. You know, we got parts of the story wrong initially, you know, and so it was really, we did that pond experiment, you know, the one where we were towing rocks across our own pond. That showed we weren't convinced about that. I thought that maybe just rainfall would make the playa slick enough that rocks would move. Clearly that was false, right? We tested that idea about the magnetic properties. Okay, it didn't work. You know, we had the wind story wrong. It wasn't actually the wind blowing the rocks, which is clearly not enough force. But wind exerted across a huge ice sheet, yes, that's plenty of force. And we hadn't really considered that as a mechanism, I think, when we went into the study. But we did do something right, which was that we set up this experiment with these GPSs and the weather station, so we would find out the answer even if we weren't there to see it. That was a good move on our part.
Genius. Well, you know what? When you said you had got things wrong, what you were really saying is that you were doing science. Because that's what science is about. You don't always have to get it right. It's about eliminating the things that you got wrong so that you get closer to the things that should be right.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it, because, you know, I have found in my scientific career as an oceanographer that very frequently I'm wrong. And that my initial hypothesis is incomplete, you know, that I don't understand enough about the phenomenon to really work out a complete theory at the beginning. But then you follow this method, right, of eliminating various things, of making new tests, and you get closer and closer to the truth. And then in our case, of course, we had this great pleasure of actually watching the whole thing, you know, in living color, so to speak, you know, right in front of us. And that was of course hugely rewarding to have that happen.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
But my lesson for all of you is that don't worry about not being right.
I know, completely.
Being wrong actually means that you're on the right path. There's something interesting that you didn't understand. Because I've realized that if I was right all the time, I wouldn't be doing very interesting science. You know, it would be boring. I would know the answer already. You know,
I think the fact that you got it wrong,
the answer.
The fact that you got it wrong motivated you even more to try and find the answer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, you know, they say that it was what was his name now? Thomas Edison. Apparently, he was being interviewed for a newspaper article, and someone said to him, you know, just being facetious, they said, "So how does it feel to know that you failed 1,000 times when making the light bulb?" And he said, "I didn't fail 1,000 times. I successfully found 1,000 ways on how not to make the light bulb." and what you did is you successfully found ways that the rocks did not move, and that helped you to actually move in the correct direction of finding the solution.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. You know, that science is this great exploration. It's such a fun thing to do. And of course, I should also admit, you know, that all this stuff with the racetrack, this was done purely for fun. It's not my major scientific work or anything like that, but it's so much fun. You know, it's a neat mystery. It revealed other mysteries we didn't have any notion about. It turns out the Park Service, you know, I showed you those pictures of the rockless trails, the ones without any rocks. They have that in their management plan. They think that people steal the rocks, and that's why there's all those trails out there. I'm quite convinced that it's a natural phenomenon, and we just don't know the answer yet. But well,
you would if you had GPS in those rocks and they went missing. Then you would know.
Yeah,
wow,
exactly. But I mean, there's too many of those rockless trails, and they're too widely distributed to be things that people steal the rocks, because the rocks are just too heavy to carry very far.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so that's a great mystery. Like, what makes trails that don't have any rocks?
Well, you know, this is what I love about today's session, that not only did I learn a lot about the actual situation, but your approach in trying to find the solution. That was the part that excited me the most. I love the problem-solving aspect and the ways that you tested your hypotheses, and if it failed, you moved to the next one. And we looked at some of the logic behind your hypotheses, which were correct, but then turned out not to be correct. And the fact that you just kept going at it and you achieved success, and then you end off with a big question mark. But then why are there trails and no rocks? And now you've got my brain all twisted in a knot, because I'm thinking, how is that possible?
Yeah, it turns out, by the way, that something like this also happens in South Africa. So I remember
is it in where they do the racing of the world's fastest car?
These
in
are
Kimberley, near the Northern Cape. They call it it's the largest salt pan in the world, I think.
Wow, by Kimberley, I'll have to check that out. The location that I was thinking is up on the escarpment east of Johannesburg, and there are stock ponds up there. And there is an old report, maybe from the 50s, of rocks moving on this stock. And then another place in the world, it also happens in central Spain. So you may have heard of the Man of La Mancha, you know, who was tilting at windmills, so a windy place. And there south of Madrid are also relatively small ponds that have moving rocks on them. And so this is not just something that happens, you know, in this one place. There are other records around the world of this kind of thing happening.
So now, are you famous for your findings? Have you published your findings, and now are you deemed the overall winners of this mystery? You know, finding the solution to the mystery.
You know, it's interesting, because I think that various people have studied this over the years. Like you saw the corral experiment with Bob Sharp. You know, I'm sure that Bob did that just for the fun of it. You know, and I think that's been the attitude of all of us who have worked on this. It's just like, it's really neat, fun science. It's not. I love it. Like, it's not like we're gonna get, you know, millions of dollars and become fabulously wealthy and so forth doing experiments like this. But it's so much pleasure, you know. And in our case, we got a whole circle of family and friends together to help us. We had to carry all those rocks across the playa. You know, and so that had its own rewards too. And just the other day, actually, there is a video made by Physics Girl. You should check out.
Yes, I know Diana.
Yeah, Diana, and she's wonderful. And she called me up. This is about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and said, you know, can I interview you about the racetrack? And I said, oh, by the way, we're going to be out there, you know, in 2 or 3 days. And so she drove
You would
out
never
there.
pass up an opportunity like that. No way.
She drove out there and interviewed us on the playa. So you can go and see that in the video.
I'm going to have to check that out. We connected a while back, but she's really, found a niche where, making science communication is done in a way that is applicable and available and understandable to all. And I think that is such an important thing. But it looks like we have run out of time. I don't know where the time goes, but I have to say that I have thoroughly enjoyed, just learning about the whole idea of the moving rocks, speaking to someone who is also Tom Hanks's voiceover artist. When Tom gets laryngitis, you can hear he sounds a little bit like Tom Hanks. And more importantly, the fact that you did it for fun. And I think that, if more people got involved in learning because they enjoyed it, it wouldn't be seen as learning, it would be seen as an adventure. And I think that is so incredible. And I just want to thank you so much for, inspiring so many young people, because they're going to be watching the YouTube recording afterwards. And they all wanted to know, a lot of them couldn't make it tonight. They all want to know what moved the rocks. I said, you're going to have to watch the video.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate it. I think this is a wonderful thing that you're doing. And I am a total believer in science communication. I think science is so fascinating. It's so wonderful to learn something about how our world works, and to really have some deep understanding of it. And that's the fundamental purpose of science, I think, is to reveal what we don't know about the world that we live in.
Absolutely. So, and don't think we're not going to get hold of you about all your other stuff. I'm fascinated about drilling in the ocean and finding out stuff about the world just from that. So we will definitely chat about that. But I just want to say a big thank you. I know it was early in the morning for you, but really, it was absolutely amazing. And as you see, it's not a case of notes preparation and questions. It was just a conversation. And I hope that, and I see Ivy was one of the stalwarts who stuck in because it's getting a little bit later here. But thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. And we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we in the science communication biz should stick together.
Completely.
There's just too many great stories out there, to not pick up on them. So.
But I will be chatting to my TEDx friends, and we'll see if we can get you connected. I think it's a great story to share.
Okay, great. Sure.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome.
Cheers.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm just going to stop the recording here.
Okay.
And I'm just going to take one. If you can just smile, I'm going to try and add myself and you in the screen, and you can smile. There we go. Excellent. We'd like to take 1 or 2 screenshots so that we've got a picture. One last one of you smiling. Let me move the mouse out the way. Excellent. There we go. Because sometimes YouTube, when it chooses a video image of you, it's always the one with your one eye was closed and your tongue was sticking out. So I'll make sure we pick a good one for you.
So Steve, how long have you been doing this? What's your background in?
I've been doing this since 1994, and we go out there and try and make maths and science exciting for students around the world. Obviously, we do mainly in Cape Town and places in South Africa.